You handled it well, Major. Meet me at the command center at 9 p.m. tonight.
Yes, Admiral. Thank you.
They handcuffed a female SEAL, sniper, in court. Then an admiral entered and everyone froze. The courtroom fell silent as bailiffs secured the handcuffs around Commander Alexandra Hayes' wrists. Her calm demeanor and piercing eyes suggested this woman was far more dangerous than anyone realized, and the mystery surrounding her identity was about to explode in ways that would leave everyone speechless. The downtown shooting range had been Detective Wells's sanctuary for 15 years, a place where the crack of gunfire drowned out the chaos of city life. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon, the rhythmic precision of shots from Lane 7 caught his attention. Each bullet found its mark with mechanical accuracy, the groupings tighter than anything he'd seen from civilian shooters. The woman firing wore simple civilian clothes, but her stance and breathing technique screamed professional training that went far beyond weekend hobby shooting. Commander Alexandra Hayes stood 5'6", with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her appearance deliberately unremarkable. To casual observers, she looked like any other professional woman taking advantage of her lunch break for stress relief. But her eyes held the steady focus of someone who'd made life and death decisions in situations most people couldn't imagine. For 3 months, she'd been visiting this range twice weekly, always paying cash, always keeping to herself. Her shooting sessions were methodical, exactly 50 rounds fired with precision that bordered on supernatural. She never spoke to other patrons, never boasted about her skills, never drew attention to herself, despite consistently outperforming everyone else on the range. What Detective Wells didn't know was that Alexandra was between classified assignments, maintaining her skills while officially on leave from operations that couldn't be discussed in civilian company. Her calm exterior masked years of high-stakes missions across multiple continents, where a single missed shot could mean the difference between mission success and international incident. The shooting range was her way of staying sharp while trying to blend into normal civilian life, a balance that was about to become impossible to maintain. When Detective Wells approached to compliment her shooting, Alexandra's response was polite but guarded. She had no identification, no permit for the custom weapon she carried, and her explanations were vague enough to raise immediate suspicions. The tension escalated when Wells noticed details that didn't add up: her tactical awareness, her professional-grade equipment, her responses that suggested training far beyond civilian levels. What started as friendly conversation was becoming an interrogation, and Alexandra realized her carefully maintained cover was about to be blown by a routine police encounter. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and your permit for that weapon," Detective Wells said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional as he studied Alexandra's custom rifle, a piece of equipment that cost more than most people's cars. Alexandra's response was measured, her voice carrying an undertone of authority that seemed at odds with her civilian appearance. "I don't have identification with me today, Detective. As for the weapon, it's legally owned." The conversation that followed revealed inconsistencies that triggered Wells' investigative instincts. Her knowledge of firearms was encyclopedic, her handling technique flawless, yet she claimed to be a consultant without specifying her field. When pressed for details about her background, her answers became increasingly evasive, while maintaining perfect composure that suggested extensive training in handling interrogation. Wells found himself in the unusual position of dealing with someone who was clearly not a threat to public safety, yet possessed capabilities that raised serious questions about who she really was and what kind of consulting required such specialized skills. The decision to pursue this further would change both their lives forever. Detective Wells made the decision to bring Alexandra in for questioning, a choice that would prove more consequential than either of them initially realized. The arrest was professional and courteous. Alexandra offered no resistance, maintaining her calm demeanor even as handcuffs were applied with apologetic efficiency. During transport to the station, Wells observed details that deepened the mystery. Alexandra's awareness of their route was tactical, noting escape routes and potential ambush points with unconscious precision. Her posture remained controlled despite restraints, and her questions about procedure suggested familiarity with law enforcement processes that went beyond civilian knowledge. At the station, initial processing revealed more questions than answers. Her fingerprints triggered immediate flags in federal databases, but the results were classified beyond Wells' clearance level. Phone calls were made to numbers he'd never seen before, conversations conducted in hushed tones that suggested his routine arrest had intersected with something far more complex than a simple weapons violation. The decision to proceed with formal charges was made despite growing evidence that Alexandra Hayes was not what she appeared to be, setting in motion events that would ultimately reveal the dangerous intersection between civilian law enforcement and classified military operations. The arraignment hearing was scheduled for the following morning, with Alexandra spending the night in custody despite offers from attorneys she claimed not to know. Her behavior in holding was exemplary, respectful to staff, helpful to other detainees, maintaining dignity that impressed even veteran officers who'd seen every type of criminal. Wells spent the evening researching what little information was available about Alexandra Hayes. Public records were sparse, employment history vague, and every attempt to dig deeper hit walls that suggested federal involvement. His captain advised him to proceed carefully, noting that certain agencies had already made inquiries about the case, though he wouldn't specify which ones. The morning of the hearing, Alexandra appeared in court, wearing the same civilian clothes from her arrest, her composure unchanged despite a night in custody. The prosecutor presented what seemed like a straightforward case: illegal possession of a firearm without proper documentation, failure to provide identification when requested by law enforcement. But as the hearing began, Wells noticed unusual activity in the courtroom. Several individuals in suits had taken seats in the gallery, their bearing and attention suggesting they were there for more than casual observation of municipal court proceedings. Something big was about to happen, and Wells found himself at the center of it. Judge Harrison had presided over thousands of cases, but something about Alexandra Hayes commanded his attention in ways that routine firearms violations never did. Her responses to questions were precise, respectful, yet revealed nothing substantial about her background or circumstances. "Ms. Hayes, you're charged with illegal possession of a firearm and failure to provide identification to law enforcement. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Alexandra replied, her voice carrying quiet confidence that suggested she knew something the court didn't. The prosecutor began presenting evidence: the custom rifle, the lack of documentation, Detective Wells' testimony about the arrest. But as details emerged about Alexandra's exceptional marksmanship and professional-grade equipment, murmurs began in the gallery. The suited observers were taking notes, their attention focused entirely on the defendant rather than the legal proceedings. Wells, testifying about the arrest, found himself describing capabilities that seemed to exceed civilian training. Alexandra's weapon handling, her tactical awareness, her calm response to arrest all suggested background that the court records didn't reflect. The mystery was deepening with every piece of evidence presented. During a brief recess, Wells noticed increased activity among the gallery observers. Phone calls were made outside the courtroom, quiet conversations held in corners, and additional individuals began arriving at the courthouse. The atmosphere was shifting from routine municipal hearing to something that felt far more significant. Alexandra's court-appointed attorney seemed increasingly uncomfortable, repeatedly requesting private consultation with his client. These conversations were brief, with Alexandra apparently providing minimal information while maintaining her composed demeanor. Her lawyer's growing nervousness suggested he was beginning to understand this case was beyond his experience. The prosecutor, initially confident about a straightforward conviction, began showing signs of uncertainty as federal interest in the case became apparent. Questions were raised about jurisdiction, about whether municipal court was the appropriate venue for charges that might involve federal considerations. Judge Harrison called for extended recess, during which Wells observed what he was now certain were federal agents conducting their own investigation in the courthouse corridors. The case was evolving beyond local law enforcement scope, though no one was yet explaining why a simple firearms violation had attracted such high-level attention. The tension in the courtroom was becoming palpable. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Additional security personnel had appeared, and the gallery was now filled with individuals whose bearings suggested military or federal law enforcement background. Judge Harrison's demeanor reflected awareness that his courtroom had become the venue for something unprecedented. The prosecutor stood to continue presenting evidence, but before he could speak, a commotion began outside the courtroom doors. Voices could be heard in the corridor, authoritative, urgent speaking in the clipped tones of military communication. The bailiffs exchanged glances, clearly receiving instructions through their earpieces. Alexandra, for the first time since her arrest, showed visible reaction. She straightened in her chair, her composure shifting to something that looked like military bearing, despite her civilian clothes and handcuffed condition. Her eyes fixed on the courtroom doors with an intensity that made everyone present turn to look in the same direction. The tension in the room was electric as everyone waited for whatever was about to happen. Wells felt his pulse quicken, knowing that the mystery surrounding Alexandra Hayes was about to be resolved in ways that would challenge everything he thought he knew about law enforcement, national security, and the hidden world of military operations that intersected with civilian life in ways most people never imagined. The courtroom doors opened with authority that commanded immediate attention. A woman in navy dress blues entered her uniform, displaying ribbons and insignia that spoke of high rank and significant service. The Admiral, her shoulder boards made her rank unmistakable, walked directly to the front of the courtroom with purpose that suggested she had every right to be there. Behind her walked two military police officers and a man in a suit who radiated federal authority. Their presence transformed the entire proceeding, with everyone present recognizing that routine municipal court business had just intersected with matters of national significance. "Your Honor," the Admiral said, her voice carrying authority that filled the courtroom, "I am Admiral Sarah Chen, United States Navy. I need to speak with the court regarding the defendant, Commander Alexandra Hayes." The title Commander hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Wells felt pieces clicking into place, the exceptional marksmanship, the tactical awareness, the calm under pressure, the federal interest in what should have been a routine case. The woman he'd arrested wasn't just a civilian with suspicious skills. She was an active-duty naval officer. Judge Harrison, clearly out of his depth, but maintaining judicial authority, addressed the Admiral directly. "Admiral Chen, this is highly irregular. The defendant is facing municipal charges that fall under this court's jurisdiction. The revelation that Alexandra was military explained everything and nothing, simultaneously raising even more questions about what kind of operations required such deep civilian cover. Your Honor, with respect, Commander Hayes is a decorated naval officer currently involved in classified operations that are vital to national security." Admiral Chen replied with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. "The charges against her stem from a misunderstanding that I'm prepared to clarify, but I must request that certain information be discussed in chambers due to classification levels." The courtroom erupted in whispers as the full implications became clear. The woman they'd arrested for illegal weapons possession was not only a military officer, but one involved in operations classified at levels that required judicial discretion. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I must inform the court that Commander Hayes' current assignment involves active threat assessment that directly impacts this jurisdiction's security. Her arrest has compromised an ongoing operation that has been months in development." The implications were staggering. Alexandra wasn't just a military officer, she was apparently working on something that affected the very city where she'd been arrested. Wells felt his understanding of the case shift completely as he realized the shooting range incident might have been related to operational requirements rather than recreational activity. "Your Honor," Admiral Chen continued, producing a folder with classifications that made Judge Harrison's eyes widen, "I'm prepared to provide limited disclosure about Commander Hayes' service record and current assignment. But I must emphasize that this information is classified and cannot be part of public record." What followed was a revelation that transformed everyone's understanding of who Alexandra Hayes really was. 22 years of naval service, including multiple deployments with SEAL teams as a sniper specialist. Decorations that included Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, and commendations that couldn't be discussed in open court. The custom rifle that had triggered the arrest wasn't illegal civilian possession. It was military equipment assigned to an active-duty special operator, maintaining readiness for classified operations. Commander Hayes holds the Navy's record for longest confirmed sniper kill. Admiral Chen revealed her voice carrying pride and respect and has been instrumental in operations that have prevented terrorist attacks on American soil. Her current assignment involves monitoring potential threats in this metropolitan area, which required her to maintain civilian cover while staying operationally ready. Detective Wells felt his worldview shifting as he realized the woman he'd arrested was one of the most lethal and decorated warriors in American military history. Her exceptional shooting at the range wasn't hobby practice, it was operational readiness for missions that protected the very community that had just put her in handcuffs. All charges against Commander Hayes must be dismissed immediately, Admiral Chen stated with finality. Furthermore, I'm requesting that all records of this arrest be sealed due to national security implications. The prosecutor, clearly out of his depth, offered no objection. The case that had seemed straightforward hours earlier had revealed complexities that required federal oversight rather than municipal prosecution. Alexandra finally spoke, her voice carrying the authority of her rank. Detective Wells treated me with complete professionalism throughout this process. His instincts about the unusual nature of the situation were correct. He just didn't have the clearance to understand why. As the handcuffs were removed from Alexandra's wrists, the transformation was immediate and striking. Her posture shifted to full military bearing, her demeanor changing from detained civilian to decorated naval officer. The woman who had spent a night in custody was revealed as one of America's most elite warriors. Admiral Chen handed Alexandra a secure phone, and the brief conversation that followed was conducted in terminology that made clear they were discussing active operations with immediate timelines. The shooting range incident had indeed compromised operational security, but not in ways that couldn't be managed with proper coordination. Commander Hayes' current assignment involves a joint task force monitoring potential terrorist activities in this region. Admiral Chen explained to Judge Harrison, her arrest has actually provided an opportunity to enhance coordination between federal operations and local law enforcement. Detective Wells found himself being briefed on security protocols he'd never imagined, clearance procedures that would allow him to interface with federal operations, and career opportunities that would utilize his investigative skills at national security levels. The courtroom that had hosted a routine municipal hearing was being transformed into a coordination center for operations that protected the entire metropolitan area from threats most citizens would never know existed. Despite the revelations, Wells struggled with questions about the intersection between military operations and civilian law enforcement. The ethical implications of active-duty military personnel operating in civilian areas, even for legitimate security purposes, raised concerns about oversight and accountability that he felt compelled to voice. Detective Admiral Chen addressed his unspoken concerns with understanding. The threats we face today don't respect traditional boundaries between military and civilian jurisdictions. Commander Hayes' assignment represents new approaches to protecting American communities from enemies who exploit those traditional separations. Alexandra added her perspective, her voice carrying the weight of experience. The shooting range wasn't recreational detective. It was operational readiness for scenarios where my skills might be needed to protect this community. The custom rifle wasn't illegal possession. It was assigned equipment for someone tasked with preventing attacks that could cost hundreds of lives. The explanation helped, but Wells recognized he was entering a world where traditional law enforcement concepts would be challenged by realities of modern security threats. The immediate aftermath of Alexandra's revelation created a whirlwind of activity that transformed the courthouse into an impromptu command center. Federal agents who had been observing from the gallery now revealed themselves as part of a joint task force that had been monitoring potential terrorist activities in the metropolitan area. Admiral Chen briefed Judge Harrison on the scope of the operation, explaining that Alexandra's arrest had occurred at a critical juncture in an ongoing investigation. The shooting range where Wells had encountered her was located near a warehouse district that had been under surveillance for months, with intelligence suggesting it was being used as a staging area for planned attacks on civilian targets. The precision shooting practice that had caught Wells's attention wasn't recreational. It was preparation for potential scenarios where Alexandra's sniper skills might be needed to neutralize threats before they could harm innocent civilians. Her civilian cover had allowed her to operate in areas where uniformed military personnel would have been immediately noticed and potentially compromised ongoing intelligence gathering. The revelation of Alexandra's true identity created immediate operational challenges that required rapid adaptation. Her arrest had been witnessed by other patrons at the shooting range, some of whom had connections to the very networks under surveillance. The compromise of her civilian cover meant that alternative approaches would be needed to maintain security. In the area, Admiral Chen explained that the terrorist cell they'd been monitoring had been planning coordinated attacks on multiple civilian targets during an upcoming major sporting event. Traditional law enforcement approaches would have required waiting for overt criminal acts before intervention, but military protocols allowed for proactive measures that could prevent the attacks entirely. The integration of Alexandra's specialized skills with Wells' local law enforcement knowledge represented a new model for addressing threats that crossed traditional jurisdictional boundaries. The partnership that had begun with her arrest was evolving into professional collaboration that could save countless lives. Admiral Chen revealed the full scope of the threat that Alexandra had been working to prevent. Intelligence gathered over months of surveillance had identified a terrorist cell with international connections planning attacks that would target civilian populations in ways designed to maximize casualties and create widespread terror. The weapons they're planning to use aren't conventional, Admiral Chen explained, her voice carrying the weight of classified intelligence. We're dealing with individuals who have access to military-grade equipment and the expertise to use it effectively against soft targets. Alexandra's role in the operation was crucial. Her sniper skills provided the task force with capabilities that traditional law enforcement couldn't match. In scenarios where precision intervention was needed to neutralize armed terrorists without risking civilian casualties, her training and experience were irreplaceable. The shooting range practice that had led to her arrest was preparation for potential scenarios where split-second decisions and perfect accuracy could mean the difference between preventing an attack and witnessing a tragedy that would rival the worst terrorist incidents in American history. Wells realized that his decision to treat Alexandra with professional respect during her arrest had inadvertently contributed to national security by maintaining the trust and cooperation necessary for effective law enforcement military coordination. Standing in the courtroom that had been transformed into an operational briefing room, Wells reflected on the journey that had begun with a routine visit to his favorite shooting range. The woman he'd arrested for weapons violations had become the key to preventing terrorist attacks that could have devastated their community. Admiral Chen, addressing both Wells and Alexandra, made an offer that would change Wells's career trajectory. Detective Wells, your professional instincts and discretion in handling this situation have been exemplary. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service is always looking for law enforcement professionals with your capabilities. The recognition was gratifying, but Wells knew the real victory would come when the terrorist threats were neutralized and the community remained safe. The arrest that had seemed like a routine enforcement action had become the foundation for a partnership that would protect American lives in ways that would never make headlines, but would keep the country secure. The transformation from municipal detective to federal agent was about to begin opening doors to service at levels Wells had never imagined possible. Within hours of the courtroom revelation, Detective Wells found himself sworn in as a special agent with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, beginning an intensive briefing process that would prepare him for joint operations with military special forces. The transition from municipal law enforcement to federal service represented opportunities for impact at national security levels he'd never imagined possible. Alexandra's cover was officially blown, but the operational requirements had evolved to make her civilian disguise unnecessary. The terrorist cell they'd been monitoring was now under active surveillance by a joint task force that combined military special operations expertise with civilian law enforcement capabilities, creating new models for protecting American communities from evolving threats. The shooting range, where their paths had first crossed, became a training facility for the Joint Task Force, with Alexandra serving as an instructor for marksmanship and tactical procedures that enhanced law enforcement capabilities. The location that had nearly compromised her mission became a center for preparing others to face similar challenges. 6 months later, the partnership between Wells and Alexandra had prevented 3 separate terrorist plots targeting civilian populations in their metropolitan area. The Joint Task Force model they'd helped develop became a template for similar operations across the country, with law enforcement agencies and military commands collaborating in ways that had previously been impossible due to jurisdictional restrictions. Wells found himself training other law enforcement officers in federal procedures and threat assessment techniques, sharing lessons learned from his transition from municipal detective to federal agent. His experience bridging civilian and military approaches to security made him valuable as an instructor and consultant for similar programs nationwide. Alexandra continued her operational assignments, but now with enhanced coordination with local law enforcement that made her missions more effective and reduced the risk of conflicts like the shooting range incident. The integration of military special operations with civilian security had created new capabilities for protecting American communities from threats that didn't respect traditional boundaries. At a recent joint training exercise, Wells and Alexandra reflected on the unlikely beginning of their partnership. The arrest that had seemed like a routine weapons violation had revealed the intersection between hidden excellence and public service, between military capability and civilian protection. Sometimes, Alexandra observed watching new recruits practice the precision shooting techniques she'd been perfecting that day. At the range, the most important partnerships begin with complete misunderstanding. Wells agreed, knowing that his decision to treat her with professional respect during that arrest had opened doors to service protecting communities in ways that would never make headlines, but kept America safe from threats most citizens would never know existed.